At some point in time, every Black person encounters the N-word. No matter who you are or where you come from, you hear it. It's not always grand or exciting or dramatic, but it happens. A kid on your sports team, your classmate on the bus, a party with some loud rap. My first encounter was somehow more underwhelming than any of those. It wasn't from a Klansman, it wasn't from someone's parents, it wasn't even from a Trump supporter. For me, it was in a YouTube video. About 5 years ago now, I was watching funny videos with my friend. I couldn't tell you who or what, but I could tell you that I heard a word I never thought I'd hear. In that moment, I felt a mess of emotions. I was confused. I was a bit anxious. I didn't quite get it, but then I turned to my friend and he was chuckling. In response to a 20-something-year-old white guy on the internet saying the N-word, he smiled and laughed. In this little tidbit of internet racism, he found humor. Now, let's fast forward to early 2020 when I started thinking about this. I could not walk across the cafeteria at my school without hearing something racist. Sometimes it was just the N-word with an A, a hard R, some other variation. Oftentimes, though, it was a bit of more complex racial humor. Some joke at the expense of a minority group. In the year 2020, I could not walk across my school's cafeteria without hearing something racist. Let that sink in. I could not walk across the cafeteria in a public high school in 2020 without hearing a racist comment. It's not all reserved for the schoolhouse, though. It follows us through online games, onto YouTube, and into social media. As frequently as people do make racist remarks hidden under the guise of a joke in real life, they make astronomically more online. The online disinhibition effect makes us more likely to say things we wouldn't ordinarily say through social media because a screen distances you from other people. And the result? Offensive memes running rampant across the internet. Now, I'm going to digress for a second here, but bear with me. For a bit of context to make sure everyone is caught up, in the simplest terms possible, memes are jokes. They derived from Richard Dawkins' definition, which was a unit of cultural transmission. But as we understand them now, memes are primarily jokes or tidbits of humor spread between people over the internet. Similar, but slightly different. Spread in order to make their friends happy, spread in order to make yourself seem funny, spread in order to get likes and validation. You've seen them before. There are minion memes, cat memes, and a whole lot of others. Anyway, this is all fine on the surface, of course, because really there's nothing inherently wrong with a 13-year-old seeking likes to bolster their diminishing ego, but a problem arises when we get into how likes can be quickly acquired. In this digital age when the human attention span appears to be declining, in order to get a lot of likes, you have to compete against millions of other people for your viewers' attention. That means that while someone is scrolling or swiping through their feed or their Explore page, you're competing to catch their attention and make them stop long enough to like your post. So while a lot of wholesome memes do exist, memes that employ a shock factor are very present and very real too. It's a total coincidence that Slim Jim and Big Chungus are popular memes. At no point did anyone in 2020 see an abnormally large Bugs Bunny from 80 years ago and start genuinely laughing at it. It's not entirely pure comedy. It's a convoluted form of shock humor. The jokes arose from the absurdity of the humor, shocking those who saw it. And they faded into obscurity once that absurdity was played out. Shock humor isn't always so simple, though. It's not always so clean. It is socially taboo to be racist. Even racists don't like to be called that. They prefer the term race realist. No one is supposed to say racist things or express racist ideas online because society has determined that those things are bad. Everyone my age knows that genuine bona fide racism is a disgusting thing, which means that no one would ever expect for you to be that. People can adjust themselves to expect anything you have to throw at them if you're just throwing something silly and random around. What they'll never expect, though, is you to say, "Get back to picking cotton." They'll never expect anyone to type, "guacamole N-word penis." In other words, edgy humor found on a 13-year-old white boy's TikToks finds its staying power in the racism and the inherent shock value that it has. What we ought to realize, though, is that everyone involved in a meme transaction is a human being, usually a young person, and what they say online cannot stay online. I acknowledged the online disinhibition effect earlier, and it still has its merits. Yes, people are more likely to say stuff through a screen than they would in real life, but what they say online does set a precedent for what they say in person. Chonkers, femboy, weeaboo, these aren't words that entered the high school's vocabulary from nowhere. They became popular online and then they became popular in real life. According to a Virginia Tech study, the percentage of people aged 15 to 21 exposed to extremist content online rose 13% from 2013 to 2016. This means that 7 in 10 of us were exposed to extremist ideas in 2016. So, much like femboys and big chunks and other internet trends, it follows that racist jokes sneak into reality, which takes me back to 2020. In the cafeteria, waiting in line for lunch, when someone yells a hard R. Essentially, we, referring to Generation Z, have entered a state where, despite being a group of people totally morally opposed to racism, are comfortable with being racist as long as it's for a joke. In our addiction to social media, in our shortened attention spans, in our pursuit of validation from internet strangers, racist jokes have thrived. And there are a whole host of problems associated with it. First, let's take off our humor lenses for a second. If a white man looked at me with a dirty look on his face and said we should bring back slavery, he would be racist, right? He would be chastised by those around him. His behavior would be generally frowned upon. Society would not condone his actions. He said a racist thing. He expressed a racist sentiment. There was something inherently wrong with him saying those words. It demeans me. It carries a history of negative connotations. It perpetuated racial tensions. If we were to change the circumstances a little, let's see the white man is an acquaintance of mine, and a situation arises, it's a true story, where he says we should bring back slavery, and everyone starts laughing. The racist statement is still racist. Nothing about the sentence changes. I am still hurt and damaged by him saying it. No matter how the context or intent changes, the racism stays racist and the negative effects persist. It still hurts me. It still carries a negative history. I mean, it's about slavery, for crying out loud. It still increases racial tension. All our normalization of racist jokes does is give white men a filter through which they can express their internalized biases. Some people will argue that it's not all bad, though. Some people will tell you that it toughens us up, which it does. Those with more exposure to racist humor respond more positively in the face of racism, and that can be interpreted as taking power away from racists. But does it? Is me not being angered by racists taking power away from them? Is their goal to make me mad? The way I see it, all it does is disarm me. When I'm berated with racist jokes and I don't have the energy to fight back anymore, all it does is make it less likely for me to argue when someone is going on a tangent about ethno-states. What's worse, even if I did find a way to selectively argue with the genuine racist out there, because of the way we perceive humor, they could play it off as a joke. It's one thing if a black comedian wants to make fun of the notion of racism and wrest racist power from the hands of the oppressor. But if Ricky from Alabama says it, it's a very different story. I mean, for starters, a white guy being racist meets my expectations, so it wouldn't have any real shock value. That was a joke. But more importantly, it's no longer about making fun of racism. It's about desensitizing us to it. Which, once again, takes me back to 2020. This is the last time. I reached a point in my life where someone yelling the N-word with a hard R did not faze me. Over the span of 5 years, as I and my peers became more and more immersed in internet culture and internet humor, I gradually became so desensitized to racism that a loud, brazen hard R did not shake my conscience. Ever since my first moment of awkward hesitation and eventual refusal to say anything, I seem to have dug myself further and further into a hole of racist humor, and at that point I blamed myself. I struggled with regret for a very long time. Regret that since 6th grade, I smiled and I nodded and I laughed at everything offensive so that my peers wouldn't hate me. That's a lot of regret for a high schooler to bear by themselves, let alone a middle schooler. Yes, we should all be more firm in our opposition to racist humor. No, we shouldn't try to maintain pleasantries with smiles and chuckles when faced with racism. But how can you expect middle and high schoolers to fight racism when they don't know what's a joke and what's real? How can you expect young people, children, to stand up for themselves when they get called triggered whenever they do? How can you expect racism to ever end when the shield of a troll face protects every racist? How can you expect a middle schooler to look a shark in the maw and then have the courage or skill to defang it? You can't. At some point, I needed to consider that maybe the kids telling me to pick cotton were at fault, and I shouldn't have had to correct them. Maybe the kids asking me for the N-word passes were wrong, and that's final. They're wrong. Maybe the only duty I have is to myself, and their failure to see their issues is on them. The burden falls on the white parents who gave their kids unrestricted access to social media before they're old enough to manage it for themselves. The white children who, in their pursuit of likes, never thought to consider our perspectives and rejected any criticisms we had. The white memers who promote and push this garbage content that has aided in the destruction of a woke generation. Now, I've done my part. I've stood my ground. At this point, the burden falls on each and every one of you in the audience who is racist at my expense, and the duty is to fix that behavior. And the duty to fix that behavior rests firmly on your shoulders. I'd like everyone my age who makes offensive jokes to stop for a second. If you don't think you make them, you probably do, because we all do. So just stop for a second and think about the people you're touching. Think about how helpless they are to defend themselves. Think about the little black boy surrounded by all his white classmates. Think about the issues that your jokes bring along with them and empathize with us, all of us, and make an effort to help us be free from racism. Thank you.